Hey guys, today we're talking all things 1031 exchange. And we have Tyson back with us with LendSure. LendSure is one of my lending partners that helps bring customized solutions to my clients. Tyson, thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, 1031 exchanges. I think the first thing we want to talk about is that a little disclaimer, we are not CPAs. So, what we're going to be talking about today is a way that you can defer taxes. And we want to bring it up as a solution, but we certainly want to involve other partners with this. So, disclaimer, we are not CPAs. Consult with your CPA if you feel like this is a good solution for you. But it's definitely something you want to be aware of if you have a portfolio of properties. So, this is specific to real estate investors. So, Tyson, let's kick it off by starting with what is a 1031 exchange?
Yeah. Well, I think you said it perfectly. It really is just an investment strategy to help your seasoned investors with a big portfolio defer taxes when they're looking to upgrade properties.
Yeah, and I think, as an investor myself in having a portfolio, we all have, you know, great performing properties that kind of did as we expected. And then we might have one or two. I know I have one that is underperforming and is not my favorite and kind of is my problem child. So this is something that if that resonates with you, you definitely want to stay tuned and listen to what we have to say. Because I think this could be a good solution for you and really help improve the health of your portfolio and defer taxes along the way. So let's talk about who this is good for. We touched on it a little bit there, but let's dive into that a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of my favorite questions to ask when talking about a 1031 transaction for any investor is exactly what you said. If you own multiple properties, there's one you don't like. I think it's a fact of life that there's always going to be favorites. They're not your children, so we can own that. There may be a property in your portfolio that you don't love. And so this is going to be specifically for individuals who are looking to upgrade that portfolio, be in a stronger position, or really just change out a specific property I mean, for any reason under the sun, you want to move on from it. You want to get into a different market. You're moving across the country and don't want your investment properties to be where you left. There's a million reasons why someone would find this appealing. So the seasoned investors is who I'd say it's for.
So why don't we bring up on the screen kind of that timeline? I think that's really going to help everybody see two ways that we can do this. And we're going to talk about the 1031 that most people hear about first, and then we'll talk about a reverse that could be another way of looking at it. So, Tyson, can you kind of walk us through the general timeline? Because we're going to keep things simple. Again, we're not CPAs, but this is what you want to be aware of. And the first thing we're going to do that Tyson's going to talk about is bring in an intermediary company. And we have
Yeah,
connections with that. So if you don't have somebody, we can hook you up with someone, but we want to involve them at the beginning of the process. That is crucial for the success of this.
not agree more. Thank you for the disclaimer and for putting it out there. That intermediary company is going to be a requirement on any 1031 exchange because they are the means by which we're deferring the taxes on the property. It's going to be run through them. So it will always be, Ashley or your loan officer working with that intermediary to complete this. And it's again, it's crucial that you bring that conversation up before you start the process so that they can walk you through specific strategies. They can cement this timeline for you. But generally speaking, very broadly, this is what the timeline is going to look like to your traditional forward facing 1031 exchange. You will identify a property that's not performing well or not performing the way that you'd like it to, and you're going to sell
That's
that
the easy
property.
part.
That is the easy part. Now, the day that that property is sold, your 1031 exchange process begins. That is day one, the day that you sell your property. From that day, you have 45 days to identify a replacement property for the property that you relinquished and sold. By day 45, you have to have found that property, made an offer on it, moving forward toward purchasing that property. And from day 45 to day 180, from the time that you closed. That is your time, or excuse me, from day 45 from the time that you sold the relinquished property to day 180 from the time that you sold the relinquished property. You have that amount of time to close on the new purchase for the replacement property. Now, in theory, that sounds really, really easy. You start with, you've got 45 days to find one, and then almost 4.5 months to close on the new one. But the reality is, with the market constraints that we're seeing, with supply and demand ever changing, there can be some stress points with the 1031 in terms of getting one of these closed on time because of a million factors that are outside of your control. And so what I wanted to bring up, what we're excited to talk to you guys about today, is kind of a differing strategy that's less commonly known, but is something that we're starting to see make waves with investors, and that is what's called a reverse exchange. And so I'll pull up, Ashley, if it's okay with you, I'll pull up that timeline or those line items right now. The way that I like to think of the reverse 1031 exchange is it's a much more proactive way to go about the same process. And it sounds a little complicated, but really it's just the opposite of what it is that we just talked about. So instead of the sale of your relinquished property kicking off your 1031 exchange, with the reverse exchange, the purchase of the replacement property is going to initiate that. So instead of having a timeline for you to make an offer, to identify a property, to close on that property, and deal with the constraints of getting a mortgage and dealing with the market, instead of having a timeline for that, you can take your time with it. Again, kind of what we introduced in the beginning, we want you to be involved with a loan officer and that intermediary 1031 company first. So they can walk you through the strategy, but you'll identify and purchase your replacement property day one. From there, you have 45 days to identify the property that you'd like to relinquish. On day 45, you've identified which property you don't like, which you probably knew which one you didn't like from day one. And then you have until day 180 to close on the sale of that property. So realistically, the way that we like to think about this is it's more proactive. You're no longer under the gun and under a timeline to close this 1031. You've already closed on your purchase. All you have to do is sell the relinquished property. And it relieves a bunch of stress from your plate in terms of that timeline and having a truncated position to be able to close.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways for me as an investor is having more flexibility and not as much stress on the timeline. Like you said, with the market that we're in, it's difficult to find cash flowing properties. It's difficult to find the property that meets your buying criteria. So by kind of removing that and kind of taking that out of the equation and doing that first and then working backwards, to me, that's attractive as an investor.
Absolutely. I think it's something we're seeing gain a lot of steam. We're one of the first lenders to be able to offer a product like this. In conversations that we've had with 1031, that intermediary company, the 1031s, oftentimes they're going to have hard money solutions or private lenders, but typically those private lenders are not going to be able to do this in all states. So every lender is going to be a little bit different. There's no continuity there. And what's great about LendSure and what we hope to bring to this partnership is instead of being licensed in some states, we are licensed to do something like this in all 50. This is something that we can accomplish for you in any state. And so there's not really a limitation there. It's the same process, it's the same routine, that we can bring you to give you that continuity.
And that's nice too, because, for me, I live in Texas. I invest in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. I'm licensed in both states. And so it's nice to be able to have the flexibility. If I want to do this, I can do that in Pennsylvania or Texas and vice versa. And they don't have to be in the same state in order to be successful with it. So, what kind of things would be important and needed that we want to share with potential investors, clients who would be interested in this? What would be needed from the lending perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad you asked because we have talked a lot about the intermediary company and things like that. But in terms of the transaction itself, it's really going to be fairly similar to any other transaction that we would do for an investor. In terms of us verifying your income, if we're going income, we can use tax returns, we can use bank statements, I can use asset depletion to qualify you with assets. I can do a whole slew of things to qualify your income, or we can pretty simply just go with a DSCR loan to qualify you for it. And I can do that in both a forward facing and reverse 1031 for the purchase of your replacement property. On top of that, we need a credit report. I'm looking for an application, and then I'm looking for asset statements so that we can determine where the cash to close is coming from. If that's on a forward facing 1031, typically your assets are going to be sitting with that intermediary company. And we'll be using those funds for our cash to close. If we are doing a reverse 1031, typically the assets will come from you, and those assets typically will be reimbursed by that intermediary company later on down the line when you sell your relinquished property. Not always, but typically. So in terms of what's really different about this program as opposed to an investor just going and purchasing an investment property outside of a 1031 is the involvement of that intermediary company up front to make sure that we're following the timeline correctly to make the tax strategy work for you.
Yeah, I mean, they're going to be the subject matter expert in this. We are partners in this process to help facilitate it, but they're really going to be the point person to make sure that all of those timelines, all of the requirements are met in order to have a successful 1031 exchange and defer the taxes.
Absolutely.
Do you have any stories that were impactful that you'd want to share about either a 1031 or a reverse 1031?
Yeah. I mean, so in terms of the reverse 1031, it's still relatively new. So candidly, I haven't seen very many of them just yet. It's something we're wanting to start the conversation on and really engage investors on it to see how much more logical sense it makes to go the reverse route. In terms of forward facing 1031s, I'd say the most impactful one, we had some seasoned investors. I'm out in Utah. I know you're in Texas. I'm in Utah. They wanted to purchase a new property in kind of a lake town here in Utah. So it's a condo they were going to rent with short-term rents using Airbnb, which we're able to verify and use for a DSCR calculation. I think the biggest impact that I could point out is that we were under a very, very sharp deadline because their 1031 period was about to expire. And the way that it worked, they were under contract for one condo in this complex, and the rents that we got didn't come back very favorably, and the DSCR fell apart, and the seller wasn't willing to extend, and we had the 1031 creeping over all of our shoulders, looking for us to get this closed. So we had a hard deadline. The borrowers ended up pivoting. They found another property in the same complex that was cheaper, which was awesome. And so we shuffled and pivoted the entire thing. We closed it as a DSCR. And I think my biggest takeaway from that, the stress that we were under as the lender to make sure that it happened, which I mean that's every day. That's part of what we do. But that same stress
There was additional stress on that one.
There was additional stress on that one, and that same stress was the borrowers were carrying that burden as well. Typically, to meet timelines, the borrower's driving it. They want to be in it. They want their investment property, and I'm like, okay, let's meet the timeline. And in this case, the 1031 intermediary company is telling my borrowers, hey, just so you know, your tax deferment status is not going to work if we don't close by this day, which caused that stress to be passed on to them. And it was just all of us were under this burden. And, we came together, we worked through it. It turned into a positive experience and we closed on time. But I learned a lot from it in terms of, hey, why would we want to do a reverse 1031? I didn't really understand the narrative of that until that transaction. And I said, a reverse would have been really, really good here. I would have liked that.
Yeah, I think that's a great example of the standard 1031 versus the reverse. I think they both have their place. Being an investor, being that the market that we're in, I would almost prefer to lean towards the reverse because I have a little bit more control and it's not going to be as demanding on me. Being that I have another job, right, as a mortgage originator. So I'm not just an investor. And some of my investor clients, that's all they do is invest, but I'm sure they invest in other things as well. And everybody's busy and in their business. So it's nice to have a little bit more flexibility. So I really like that you talked about the reverse and that we're bringing that to everybody today. We talked a little bit about the timeline in closing. Obviously, everybody can tell that timelines is there. It's a big part of the whether it's the reverse or the standard. Talk about the time to close in this kind of transaction. What can people expect?
Yeah, absolutely. So my standard answer is less than 30 days. That's really what we are always striving for. What's great about these investor transactions, and today we're specifically speaking to investors. Um, what's great about investor transactions is that we don't have to abide by the same TRID timeline per se, and we follow the skeleton of it. In terms of, I still send out a loan estimate, I still send out a closing disclosure, and so on and so forth. So the structure is there, but in terms of you having to have waiting periods and things like that, we don't have that. And so we can move a little bit faster because there's not just days that are lost for guidelines and for regulations. And so I'd say that's one nice feather in our cap in terms of those investment transactions is typically, again, standard answer of 30 days or less. We can in some cases move a lot faster than that depending on what we have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so I appreciate you sharing about the timeline because certainly that's something that investors are going to have questions on because it is so time sensitive. So it's just like all of our other standard products, whether it's DSCR, bank statement, whatever tool we're using in this 1031, it's going to be relatively the same time frame, around 25 to 30 days. I like to say around 25 average, 30 on the long end. Is there anything else that you would want to share about 1031s before we wrap things up?
I think the biggest thing that I could underscore, we've said it more than once, but every situation is very different. So we've talked about generalities today in terms of what the general timeline looks like. I'm going to echo it again. I sound like a broken record. Please involve a 1031 company and get involved with Ashley prior to embarking on something like this. It's not something that anytime you're working with tax deferment and working with the IRS, you want to make sure that you follow the appropriate steps to do it the right way, because there's not a redo to do it over again. So I'd say that would be the biggest thing that I could cement here. But then additionally, in terms of creative financing options, actually something that you said that I appreciate is that we try to be creative, we try to problem solve. I'm very solution oriented. And so if there are situations where you're an investor, you have several properties, you want to start a conversation like this, please get Ashley involved so that we can talk about it and see if something like this isn't a fit, if we can't find a solution for you.
Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. And again, we're not CPAs. We're not going to pretend to be. We want to involve those other experts and come together as a team to make this happen for you. All the pieces need to come together. The CPA can't do it for you. The intermediary can't just do it for you. It's going to take all of us if you're going to use financing to make this happen. So, involve us early. And we'll make sure if you don't have an intermediary that you can trust, that you are aware of, we're happy to make a recommendation and hook you up with one of those. And then we can start that conversation and see if this is a good fit for you. So hopefully today what we shared sparked some interest, got you thinking, made you aware of something that you may not have been aware of, and know that it's an option for you because we all have one of those properties that maybe not is our favorite, it's underperforming. And there are ways that we can be smart about deferring taxes if that's something that's important to you. So thanks for being here with us. We appreciate your time, Tyson, as always. And thank you guys for spending some time with us. Stay tuned for the next one, and we'll bring you some more good content. Thanks.
Thank you.